This is Tyrese Haliburton, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
Joining us now, making his return to setting the pace once the season has started, it is Chris Denari from FanDuel Sports Network. Is that what it's called now? I'm trying to make sure I
Yeah.
don't call it the wrong thing. So,
Yeah, FanDuel Sports Network. I have not gotten it wrong, Alex, in the 5 games that we've done and the 2 preseason games. So I am here in the heart of New Orleans as we speak, getting ready for the next Pacers game. So a lot of road games, a lot of road trips here in November and December.
and you're spending your Halloween in a hotel room. So I have to ask, I see you had a Raising Cane's cup you
Yeah,
were drinking out of before we started. So,
yeah.
big Raising Cane's fan?
I do like Raising Cane's. They just put one in Carmel or in Westfield, not far from my house. Honestly, the first time I ate at a Raising Cane's was a year or two ago. There's one right across from our hotel in Boston. And I really had not eaten at a Raising Cane's, but man, the dip, the sauce that you dip
Uh-huh.
the chicken fingers in. So there's a Riverwalk here in New Orleans. I mean, you've got Caesars, you got all kinds of stuff going on. I am not a gambler. I'm not a uh, just give my money to somebody and let them take it. So I knew I was doing this. I've got prep to do tonight. So I thought, yeah, I'll go find Raising Cane. So I was very happy with that.
Yeah, you can't beat the cane sauce. It is very good. Did you get some Texas toast as well?
I did. I got the coleslaw. I got the 4 piece. I got the 4 piece, the coleslaw, the Texas toast, and the fries.
There we
So yeah.
go. Everything that you need for a healthy
Yes.
meal on Halloween, right?
Yes, absolutely. And there were lots of people dressed in Halloween garb. So the one
Okay.
thing I'm missing tonight here in New Orleans is my almost 3-year-old grandson trick-or-treating tonight. So
Yeah.
I did not get to do that, but I've seen the pictures and the videos via FaceTime. So
Well, hey, you got that, and hopefully I can make up for a little bit by bringing you on setting the pace, right? Like, what else would you rather be doing than talking about the Pacers for another 30 to 35 minutes on this show? But I'm glad we got the Raising Cane's conversation in because I too am a fan of Raising Cane's, and I do love that dipping sauce. It is hard to beat, and I love the simplicity of their menu, right?
yeah,
No ranch, no other sauces.
very easy.
Yep.
Yeah. I,
It's like Taco Bell, right? They just have increased their menu to like 50 some items where Raising Cane has like three.
I mean, it was like 4 piece, 6 piece, maybe an 8 or 9 piece. I think they have a sandwich, and then you can get a 21 piece caterer, for catering and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, when I look at the menu, it's easy.
Yeah.
It just depends how hungry you are.
Yeah. That's true. Hopefully you didn't have a 21 piece. That'd be a little bit
No,
too
no,
much.
I went with the four. I went with the
Yeah.
four.
Went with the
The three
four.
did the three did not have the coleslaw, and I really wanted some coleslaw tonight.
Mm,
So
I
yeah,
got you. So you could have got it on the side. I'm sure you could have ordered
yeah, I
some,
could have. I could have.
but no smothered chicken, right?
No smothered chicken. We have not had a smothered chicken this year yet. I tell you what, though, the last few games with Isaiah Jackson, we could have had a smothered chicken. And Obi got one. Obi got one. He got Luke Cornett last night.
Yeah.
That
Pretty
could have been
good.
a smothered chicken, but my partner has not opted to give one out yet.
Well, we'll have to see if we can have Tyrese put a little bit more pressure on him to get another one out next season. But let's get into this Pacers team. It's been about a week now since the season started. We've had 5 games. They're sitting at 2-3, and they had a massive win over the Boston Celtics in overtime, 135-132. You were on the call last night. And, from your vantage point and from what you've seen this season, do you think that Pacers win over Boston is the start of a turnaround from the slow start?
Well, I think so. I mean, I saw some good things in the Monday loss at Orlando. I thought the team played with better pace. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed is that, transition points, fast break points have been, few and far between until they had 29 against Boston. I mean, that reminds you of last year's Pacers team. I think a couple of things, they're still shooting the ball well. They're top 10 in the NBA in field goal percentage. 3-point shooting has been better the last 3 games. The first 2 games, including that 3 for 30 game in New York, was not very good at all. But I think adapting a little bit to the way the game is called now, it's a little bit more physical. I think defenders can slow things down a little bit so you don't have as much freedom of movement. And if you think about last year, how well the Pacers offense flowed, I think it flowed because of freedom of movement. but I think they've adapted to it. I think it's taken them a few games to, figure things out. I thought the ball movement was really strong for 3.5 quarters last night in the Boston win. So I do think, they've taken strides like that. And if you look at last year, they got off to a little bit of a slow start. Tyrese Haliburton didn't shoot the ball particularly well early in the year, just as he hasn't necessarily shot the ball very well here. So I do think, last night was a very important step. They were pretty dominant for 3+ quarters. And then, Boston made that huge run to force overtime. And then I give the Pacers a lot of credit, Alex, because the momentum had clearly shifted in that game. Boston had all the momentum. The Pacers had everything to lose, but they were able to rally, and Pascal hit some big shots down the stretch.
That would have been a devastating loss if the Pacers had blown that lead in the fourth quarter and lost to Boston in overtime. So I was glad to see them pull it out. I think they needed that win just for their morale. And I do want to ask you, though, because we've heard Rick Carlisle talk about it. You just talked about it, like the freedom of movement's not there as much. It feels like the games have been quite a bit longer. And do you think that's because they're calling more fouls, or is it because teams are just not playing without fouling?
That's an interesting point, because even though they say they're not calling as many fouls, there was a game the other night. I think that it was the game that Orlando played before they played the Pacers, and there were 99 free throws shot in the game. It might have been Philadelphia. It was one of the teams. And so, you're thinking, okay, they're not really calling fouls, but they are calling fouls. And I think one of the issues the Pacers have had is they fouled a little bit too much. And I think it's getting adjusted to how the game is called. If you look at Indiana's last 3 games, they have been long, because Philadelphia was overtime, Boston was overtime, and Orlando seemed to go forever. So yeah, it's been interesting to see how the officials have dictated things. And I think it's still a small sample size. Everybody's played about 4 or 5 games. I think we'll have a better feel for it as we get into December.
And it's an adjustment period for the referees too, right? It's not just the players. The referees are trying to adjust to the new rules, so it'll just take some time. But 2 wins for the Pacers so far, which I think a lot of people probably, when you look at the schedule, would be okay with 2 wins, right? Maybe you didn't expect to beat Boston, but, you get a big win here. But the 2 wins have been kind of centered around the play of one particular shooting guard for the Pacers, and that's Bennedict Mathurin, who has had big games on the road against Detroit, and, of course, 30 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists off the bench against Boston. Do you think he can sustain a high level of play for the entirety of the season, or how important is him sustaining a high level of play to the overall Pacers success of the Pacers?
Well, I think the strength of this team is their depth. To a man, they'll say their superpower is their depth. And so, I think Benedict brings the Pacers a needed push off the bench. I mean, I think you look at the bench, you've got guys that could be starters. I mean, Obi Toppin's been a starter. T.J. McConnell in his career in Philadelphia was a starter. Mathurin could start. So I like those guys playing together. The one thing you've noticed here through the first 5 games is Rick Carlisle is going to play who he thinks is playing well that night. And if you're not playing all that well, your minutes are probably not going to be there. But it's not like he holds it against you, for the next game. And so, Mathurin played very well in the Detroit win with 14 fourth quarter points. In a game that the Pacers struggled, he had 20 in New York, and then had a couple of 5-point games and just didn't seem to be, very effective offensively in the Philadelphia and Orlando game. But he was needed in the Boston game coming on off the bench, because I think the starters did a really good job. The starters have been really good in the last 2 games. I mean, getting the Pacers off to good starts. And then you need that bench to come in and continue that. And I think that's what Mathurin did very early, really, in the Boston game, because Andrew Nembhard only played 5 minutes. So, Mathurin is very important to this team, because he's one of the guys that can put it on the floor, get to the basket, and draw fouls and get to the free throw line. And we know he's a good free throw shooter. He was 10 of 11 against Boston, and that's very important for this team.
There's not a lot of guys that can do what Mathurin does on this roster. Probably nobody that can do all the things that he can do offensively. So he's a 3-level scorer and can do a lot of special things. And I think it was a great confidence booster for him to have that game and play through the turnovers. But I do have to ask about the Nembhard injury, because it was a little bit weird to me that the team did not announce that he was injured and would not be returning to the game, and kind of just left it kind of open-ended. ESPN broadcast had that. I know Pat Boylan had that as well. And JJ, I texted him about it, and he said they're saying it's not an injury. So curious, is that something the Pacers don't have to share with reporters when they have a guy out with an injury, or how does that work protocol-wise, I guess, for the league?
That's a good question. It sounded like everything happened just, as I look back again, because when he left the game, I thought he just left the game because they wanted to get Mathurin in. And, sometimes rotations are different. I mean, think back to the game on Monday when TJ McConnell barely played. So I really wasn't sure, but I think it all, from what I can gather, and again, I'm trying to assess this from where I sit, calling the game. And now that I know that he's been listed on Thursday with, he's questionable for the game against New Orleans. I think it all happened right as the team was out there, for the national anthem and getting ready to start. So I think it wasn't like, most of these injuries, going in, Rick knows when he meets with the media, when you and I are sitting in the media room, in the interview room, and he'll mention, hey, Miles Turner's out tonight or this. I don't think they knew to the extent that Nembhard was having problems, and it just happened so fast that it sort of it just sort of happened, I guess. So, it's very rare for things to happen like that where we don't know, why somebody's not coming back out on the floor.
But there's no rule that requires them to explain or give that information to reporters during the game.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I'd have to go. I don't even know that that's in the NBA rule book. That's just a matter, between athletic trainers and PR staff and that kind of thing. So not really quite sure how all that works, and, what happened on Wednesday night when, we weren't really sure what Nembhard's status was.
Yeah, it was just really weird to me. I just thought, man, that's kind of an interesting development for him to be completely pulled from the rotation and not have an injury. And I know there was a lot of fans that were like, see, they finally benched Nembhard for Mathurin. And I think that narrative was just not accurate. So I'm glad that was cleared up after the game. I just didn't know if there was going to be like any repercussions maybe from the Pacers not addressing that injury during the game.
Because if you looked at Nembhard sitting on the bench, he was smiling, he was engaged with his teammates. So it wasn't like he was sitting over there, he'd been taken out of the game and he was pouting or anything like that. So just one of those situations that honestly very rarely happens, because most of the injuries you see happen on the floor, and a guy goes to the locker room, he sprained his ankle or did something like that, and you have a pretty good idea of what might have happened. This was one of those, I think, that just happened right as, the national anthem was occurring. He had gone through warm-ups. He's starting the game. It just made it a little bit difficult for us to sort of know how to address it because we weren't sure really what was happening.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for nosediving into that a little bit too much there. I was just curious if there was protocol. Yeah. But, you brought up TJ McConnell and the rotations being a little bit different, and he only played 6 minutes against the Magic, and he came in the second quarter, which was not normal. Usually he comes in the first and kind of closes things out for the first quarter and then carries over into the second quarter, but didn't play at all until the second quarter. And he just didn't look like himself, looked a little bit rusty. And Carlisle said the following day on the radio with Kevin Bowen and Andy Sweeney that basically, he looked a little tired after the Philly game and his legs just weren't there for Orlando. So I'm just kind of curious. We know TJ is getting a little bit older in his NBA career. Do you think that with how hard he plays, that the Pacers will maybe try to scale back a little bit on his minutes, specifically on, back-to-backs and kind of utilize their point guard depth with Nembhard and Haliburton to kind of give him some nights off, or maybe they can just say, you know what, TJ, we need you for the playoffs. We want to rest you and not put too much wear and tear on your body throughout the season.
It'll be interesting. I mean, I think maybe some of the thing that played into it Monday, I don't think people knew, and we didn't really tell people, but on Sunday for the 3:30 game against Philadelphia, it's a back-to-back, and we were scheduled to fly at 8 o'clock. When we get out to the airport, the plane has mechanical issues, and we're told we're not going to fly until 10:30, 10:45. And so what we ended up doing is the Colts landed from Houston, and we took that plane to Orlando. And we did not I think I got to bed at like 2 o'clock. So we got in way later than we were supposed to. I mean, we were supposed to land in Orlando and probably should have been at the hotel, 10:30 or 11, and it was 2 o'clock. So I don't know. I mean, it could have been just one of those nights too where TJ just didn't feel it. I don't anticipate that's going to happen very often. Will they manage his minutes in the second out of a back-to-back? I think they could, but we saw how valuable he was in the Boston game, right? I mean, he was super valuable in helping the Pacers build that 24-point lead, and then he played overtime. They didn't have Nembhard, so McConnell was out there and played a huge role, I thought, in the Pacers coming back to win that game. So I just think they have a number of different ways they can go on different nights, and part of it will be what a back-to-back is. Part of it will be 3 games in 4 nights, 4 games in 6 nights, those types of things. I just think it gives them flexibility because they know they've got players like Ben Shepherd who can be ready to play. So I don't think it's etched in stone with how they'll utilize TJ McConnell and his minutes.
And that's fair. I know that everybody realizes how important TJ McConnell is to this roster and what he brings on a night-to-night basis. It's very rare that you see a night like he had in Orlando on a consistent basis with TJ. That's just not who he is. So I just was curious because of Carlisle mentioning he was tired, but that is a great tidbit about the plane landing a little bit later. And I think that does make some sense to why there could have been some fatigue there, especially coming off an overtime, back-to-back right there against the Sixers before that. So moving forward, though, James Wiseman unfortunately gets hurt. First game of the season against Detroit. He's had surgery, and the Pacers have, basically said we're not ruling him out for the season yet. He could still come back. Miles Turner ends up missing the game against Boston with an injury, and so now they're down to 1 true 5 on the roster, and Isaiah Jackson. And then Carlisle said, it's going to have to be up to Obi Toppin, maybe Enrique Freeman, maybe Jarris will play some small ball 5, even Pascal. So curious your thoughts, with that open roster spot the Pacers have, do you think they'll utilize that to maybe look at getting another center in there just to have some depth at that 5 spot? Or do you think that they like their small ball lineup enough that if it happens to come down to that they'll just roll with that?
I think that open roster spot is something that they could utilize at some point. I think that's why they opted to keep that spot open. You had Kendall Brown and Cole Swider, who were both sort of gunning for that 15th position. But I think the Pacers looked at it and felt at when the season started that a 14-man roster with James Wiseman healthy was the way they wanted to go. Now with Wiseman out for some time, it will be interesting to see, how the Pacers, and this is where Alex, I'm not one of those capologists, with where they are and the salary cap and and all those things. So I'm not sure. I mean, there may be a time a little bit later in the year where they opt to add somebody to the roster. But right now, I think Rick has confidence in the guys that he has. The question is when you play a team that's very, very big, how do you deal with Nikola Jokic, those types of things, if you don't have Miles Turner? I think if Miles is healthy and you've got Isaiah behind him, and then you've got Freeman and Toppin and Walker, I think you're still in pretty good shape. The question is, as we look at it right now, what is Miles' situation? Will he be available for New Orleans? Will he be available for Dallas? He wants to play in Dallas. I mean, that's his hometown. But I think all options are possible. Kevin Pritchard likes to use the word optionality, and I think that 15th roster spot gives them some optionality as they look at things as the season progresses.
Yeah, and I mean, they've utilized a small ball lineup even when they've had Turner and Isaiah Jackson both healthy at times, just because they like that dynamic. They did it against Philadelphia and had some really nice moments there with Siakam and Toppin. And of course, against Boston, I thought that they played really well together too. So while you might not have the size that you might want, depending upon the matchup, even if you do talk about a guy like Jokic, you get pretty athletic with Obi at the 5, and I think
Yeah.
that can just kind of give your team a totally different dynamic, and it's kind of fun to watch. I think Obi Toppin has really grown as a player in this system, and he fits so well. So it's just interesting to me, kind of how they could go about doing that, but who out there on the market fits this style of play too? I think that's the big question for me. Like, you got to be in great shape to play this pace the Pacers want to play. So I think that's more of why they probably haven't brought somebody in my opinion. But we'll see what happens there. I want to transition into Tyrese Haliburton now, though, because he's gotten off to a slow start. I think he's been pretty inconsistent so far. But what are the biggest differences you've seen from his play style and how other teams are defending him compared to last year?
Well, I think the one thing is I'm sure the Pacers surprised some teams last year with the way they played, right? They played even faster than they had played the year before. And so from a defensive standpoint, I think teams are getting back as the Pacers are looking to get in transition. Now, again, I mentioned Indiana scored 29 fast break points against Boston. I thought Tyrese did a really good job of orchestrating things, finding, even though he didn't shoot the ball very well, he still had a double-double with 12 assists. So I think JJ was on with JMV the other day and said that Tyrese's shooting numbers were the same this year early through 4 or 5 games as they were last year. We just remember when Tyrese got extremely hot in December, late November and December in the in-season tournament. But he got off to a slow start. I thought he came out of it a little bit with the 2 games against Philadelphia and Orlando. He was 8 of 18 from 3-point range in those 2 games. Against Boston, he was 2 of 10, but in overtime, he hit a huge 3. So I think he'll be fine. I think the biggest thing, Alex, that I look at too is this is still a young group, and they have to figure out now how to deal with being the hunted and not being the hunter. And last year, they could play a little bit more loose because nobody expected anything from them. But yet then they got in the playoffs, and I didn't think they played tight. I don't want to say they've played a little tight. I think they've been a little flat at times this year, but I think they're realizing what you have to do as you accept the challenge as a better team. And other teams look at you differently. They just do. And so that means you've got to raise your level of play and your intensity and those types of things a little bit more, because you're not the Indiana Pacers that won 35 games. You're the Indiana Pacers that won 47 games and went to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I just think teams are playing them a little harder, and I think the Pacers have to adjust to that. And I think Tyrese is adjusting to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. He's an all-star starter last year. He's all-NBA third team, and he's on Team USA winning an Olympic gold medal with those guys. Like, he's definitely building up that resume that people use that as like I guess you could say like a challenge to themselves to say, I want to prove myself against this guy. I want to shut him down. Jalen Suggs, I thought, did a great job on him defensively in that 4th quarter, just completely draped all over him, shadowing him everywhere he went. It was tough, but I got to ask, because it was a really busy offseason for Tyrese Haliburton. Do you think that maybe the slow start could be relate to the fact that he was just so caught up in all these different activities during the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on for him. I mean, people want a piece of Tyrese, and he's got to learn how to deal with that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're in the past, the Kobe Bryants, the LeBron James, the Steph Currys, they've all dealt with that. They are LeBron and Steph now, who are on the Olympic team with Tyrese. I'm sure that was a big help. They can help him understand what it's like now to have to deal with all that. But I look at the stat sheet and, against Boston, he has 17 points, 12 assists, 6 rebounds, and 2 steals. Those are still pretty good numbers.
Right.
Those are really good numbers. But, he was doing, 22 and 18 last year. So I think he'll be fine. I really do. It sometimes takes some time to adapt to those things. But I've seen enough in the last few games to know that we're going to get Tyrese exactly who this team needs to be its driving force.
No, absolutely. I think it's good to remind people, hey, it's still October, right? It's only 5 games in, and I think Facci said it best on one of our recap shows. If the Pacers are going to be playing bad basketball, I'd rather it be in October than later in the season. So,
Sure. Yeah.
you know,
You don't
it's
want to dig yourself a hole, but I think you can get better. And, we all learn from adversity. And, the Pacers, were not happy with how they played in New York. And then, they have a 5-point lead with 90 seconds to go against Philadelphia and lose. 8-point lead in the fourth quarter against Orlando. Yeah, you'd rather win those games, but there are a lot of things you can learn about yourself. And I think that helped them in the overtime against Boston. Having gone through what they went through in the previous 2 games, they were able to overcome that against a really, really good team.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about it like they're the hunted now versus the hunter, and the whole entire team talked about that. I mean, since the season was over till all of the the media day stuff, like they knew like teams are going to be coming for them. They weren't on anybody's, they weren't, everybody was on their radar now, I guess, or they were on people's radars. People weren't sleeping on them, and I think that that's a great point. They said it, but I don't really know if they understood how difficult that was going to be. So I think it's a learning process, right? It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to experience it. So,
yeah, no question. No, you're absolutely right. You can think about it all you want, but until you go through it, you don't know what it's like.
Yeah, exactly. And one guy that has, right, it's Pascal Siakam. And he's been really good this year. Probably has played his best basketball, in my opinion. As a Pacer on both sides of the basketball, I feel like he's been much better defensively and had a great defensive game against Boston. I think he was really good defensively against Philadelphia as well. Just continuing to kind of grow as a defense needs to improve. I think that I've seen him take his game to another level. But I'm curious, what have been your early season thoughts on Pascal? And, maybe what are some areas you'd like to see him improve on or the team improve around him?
Well, we were talking before we went on. Sometimes I think they lose track of him. And he had 23 points through 3 quarters. And I remember, late in the fourth quarter saying something to Quinn like, Pascal's not touched the ball. Now he had rested and he'd been out of the lineup for a few minutes, but he's a guy that's got to touch the ball because he can do things that really not very many other players on the Pacers can do. He can score in the post. He can create his own shot, those types of things, shoot off balance. Clearly, they went to him to tie it in overtime. And then I thought Tyrese made a really good play in that 2-man game to get him the 3-point shot over Derek White. So, I think he's playing really, really good basketball all around. He's had a near triple-double in one of the games this year. Against Boston, he has 29, 11, 5 assists. You can't ask for anything more. And it's just really good to see a guy that wanted to be here, signs a big contract, but he wanted to be an Indiana Pacer. And so I've said oftentimes, Alex, there are sometimes I pinch myself to say, hey, Pascal Siakam really plays for the Pacers.
Yeah.
Because I know how good a player he was in Toronto, helping them win a championship. And he's played really, really well here early in the year.
No, absolutely. I think he's been really good. And you bring up a great point, and we talked about it off air too, just like not finding him in the crunch time. It's happened multiple games. I went back and read on our post-game recap show against the 76ers how many times he touched the ball in the final 2 minutes in terms of like shot attempts, and he didn't have any. The only time he was mentioned in there is when he had a take foul, I think, on Kelly Oubre to stop the clock. So it was like, I understand that you have Nembhard kind of initiating offense with Haliburton being so heavily guarded, but you got to get some action set up where you can get Siakam the ball and let him do his thing, because that's why you paid him all that money. That's why you traded for him, because he's got that experience, and he's supposed to be the number 2 guy, right? That's what they're paying him to do. So at times he can be the number 1 guy, right? And I think that's fine with Tyrese, because Tyrese is more than happy to deflect that onto him. But I think sometimes the Pacers have lost him a little bit in terms of getting him involved. And I kind of want to know, like, is that something that I know Carlisle doesn't like to call out of plays and things like that, but he ended up calling that set play in overtime to get him the ball for the tying shot. How much more should Carlisle kind of put his, implement his thoughts and run a play specifically for Pascal when he kind of sees they're not going to him enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do at some point. I mean, I'm not sure how many, we know that this is a read and react offense. There are principles, there are rules in what you do in the high pick and roll and ball screens and ghost screens and all those kinds of things. But I think some point the game becomes very simple. I mean, you'll hear Quinn at times, a lot of teams in their switching, Pascal gets a mismatch against a smaller player, and that needs to be an immediate pass. You may need to reverse the ball to the wing to make that pass. I thought the Pacers got in trouble in the Philadelphia game. I think Philadelphia, where I think Miles had made some good passes, but then he was trying to feed Pascal in the post, but it was really the wrong angle. It came from the top of the key, and it really needed to come from the wing. So I just think it's recognition of who is guarding Pascal, where he is on the floor, and where he can be most effective.
Great stuff there, Chris. I have one more question for you as we wrap things up here, and it's not a fun one. It's another serious question. So maybe I'll ask you another fun one after. But what have been the biggest issues you've seen with this team one weekend, and how correctable are they?
I think giving up the offensive rebounds, the turnovers, they've been sloppy. Even in the Boston game late. I mean, that's one of the reasons the Celtics got back in it. Poor inbounds pass, just being sloppy. Think back to the Philadelphia game. You've got a 5-point lead, 3 straight possessions. You turn the ball over with ball handling mistakes. I mean, that just can't happen. So I think this team has to do a better job of taking care of the ball. And you don't necessarily have to win the battle of the boards, but you can't get beat by double figures, and you can't give up a lot of second chance points. So I think those are the areas that they need to improve on. I mean, their field goal percentage, like I said, I mean, they're top 5, 6 in the NBA, 48%. They shot better than 50% last year. 3-point shooting is starting to come around. The other issue, and they did it much better against Boston, free throw shooting. They were 71% prior to the Boston game. They went 20 of 24. That was very important. So I think the turnovers, they've been sloppy. The rebounding and free throws. I mean, sort of the mundane type things that you need to do. But if you take care of those basic things, they do so many other things so well that they'll win a lot of games when they do that.
Yeah, you talk about it. A couple of free throws made here and there, or a couple of offensive rebounds collected, or defensive rebounds collected, so the team doesn't get another offensive rebound, or one turnover. The Pacers could be sitting with a 4-1 record, right? Easily, we're in those Orlando and Philadelphia games, losing by 4 points each. So it's learning. It's growing pains. It's that that opportunity to learn from your mistakes and get better. So hopefully they can build off that Boston win and continue to just develop those good habits and continue to approach the game right with a more serious mindset, knowing that they're the hunted now versus the hunter. So really appreciate all of your insight, Chris, on this team. I know you are around the team, obviously, giving us the great insight on when the plane landed and taking the Colts play when they got back. Like, that's great stuff right there. But for a fun stuff, I mean, you did talk about the smothered chicken with Quinn Buckner a little bit, but do you have any fun Quinn stories that you would be willing to share with us? Maybe something that he said that's funny to you, maybe a fun thing that stood out, or just something silly he did that was hilarious to you guys. Quinn's a great character.
Just in the last couple of days, the one funny thing is to see he and Cornbread Maxwell, because they were teammates in Boston, and Cornbread came up to me the other day and asked if our owners were going to be at the game. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, Herb Simon's always at the game and all that. He goes, no, I'm talking about Quinn. But they just have a great relationship. And, I'd have to think back to stories, but Quinn is so revered, by people throughout the league. I mean, and part of it is, think about what he accomplished. I mean, you go back almost 50 years to the last team to go unbeaten, in college basketball, 32-0. He wins an Olympic gold medal. He has won a championship at Boston. He won 2 or 3 high school state championships. I'll be honest, I think the guy should be in the Naismith Hall of Fame just because of what he's accomplished with all those things. So, but yeah, we just need to get him to say smothered chicken a few more times, because that's one of his, that resonates with the fans. I mean, I can't tell you, I mean, I may be somewhere in the summer and somebody will go, hey, when's your partner going to say smothered chicken?
That's great.
I just laugh. I just laugh.
Yeah, no, I think it's great stuff. I mean, everybody enjoys it because Quinn is such a character. I mean, and I love how animated he gets, right? And sometimes he can't even help himself. You know, you'll be talking. I was dying in the first game. I had to post about it because he was so worried about Miles Turner with his fouls, and he was like, "Oh no, that's like 5 or 6." You're like, "Well, he's got 3." And you're just trying to keep it professional
Yeah,
and
because he
straight.
was worried because Miles was fouling, but he had fouled a bunch, but it felt like he had 5 or 6, but yeah, he only had 3.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was great. I was cracking up. I was like, you can just tell Quinn is so into it, and you're trying to keep it professional, and so you can't respond too much to his, not antics,
Well,
but
well, one of the things that he said, this is what I'll leave you with, is he has always said, and he coined the phrase. He said, "We're in the infotainment business." He goes, we broadcast 4 or 5 games a week. People have jobs. If the Pacers are their favorite team, they sit down at their house at 7 o'clock and they just want to be entertained and informed. And so it's our job to inform them, but at the same point, you got to have a little fun, right? Now, people know that we want the Pacers to win, but we know that we're coming into your house or wherever you're watching the game, and I think people deserve a little fun, right? It's sports, so I think that was aptly defined by Quinn. What we do, it's infotainment.
No, that's
Just
great. That's
like
a
you are
great way to
providing.
end.
You and Facci are providing infotainment.
There we go. Yeah, exactly. And we did too tonight. Talking about
Right.
Raising Canes, and we
Right.
talked Pacers, and we talked Quinn Buckner. I mean, where else are you going to get this at? Nowhere else except setting the pace. So,
And, and the thing is, it's Halloween, and I'm wearing an old school Pacers with the old hand and the basketball.
the
So
tennis ball, basketball.
that's my Halloween outfit for the night.
Yeah, I'm going as 2021 Alex when I used to do my hair like this. I was trying to like do it like I normally do, and I was like, you know what, it's just not falling tonight, so I'm just gonna comb it over like I used to do it. So that's what I'm doing tonight. But Chris, a lot of fun. Appreciate it. Hope you have a great time at the game tomorrow, and we'll be looking forward to hearing you on the call. But anything else before we sign off?
Nope. We'll have it FanDuel Sports Network Friday night, 7:30 pregame, 8 o'clock tip. And then Monday, it's a late tip because all 30 teams are playing the night before the election. They're staggering the starts. We will tip off at 9:45 Eastern time in Dallas. So 8:45. So I'm assuming, yeah, we'll be on the air with our pregame at 9 o'clock Eastern. 9:30 we'll come on the air and we'll tip at 9:45. So we are staying the night that night in Dallas. Because if we came home, I think we'd get home at like 5 or 5:30 in the morning. So,
And then they got a game Wednesday, right, against Orlando.
And then we're Wednesday at Orlando, and then back out on the road to Charlotte.
Crazy schedule. And I know Facci is already going to be complaining about how late the recording will be on Monday night. So Facci, if you're listening back to this right now, get you some rest on Monday during the day because we're going to be up late for a game recap. But Chris, thanks so much. Like I said, good luck tomorrow. Hopefully the Pacers can get another victory, get back to 500, and I think all will be right in Pacers world. So thank you everybody for joining us here on Setting the Pace. We'll be back on Sunday for our 1000th episode of Setting the Pace. So hope you guys tune into that. It's a big milestone for Facci now, and we are going to celebrate and hopefully have a Pelicans win to talk about and a Mavericks preview. So until then, we'll talk to y'all then. Peace out, Pacer Nation.